Hi everyone, welcome. We'll be starting shortly. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, and thank you for your patience.
Great. Hello, everyone. Nod your head if you could hear me. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone to this, after a crazy day, it seems, at the polls and now with the election count. It's it's going to be a very interesting conversation, I think, this morning. Welcome to UMD's virtual hour on Macedonian COVID-19 election results and what the future holds. I am really excited to be joined today with Stefani Taskova Miteva from all the way from Strumica, Macedonia. And so I'm based in DC and she's based in Strumica. Welcome, Stefani.
Hi Metal, thank you for organizing this. I'm happy to be on.
Excellent. And we have an awesome audience on Facebook, it seems, and on the Zoom chat and call. Please, if anybody has any questions throughout today's program, please post that in the chat room on Zoom or in the comment section on Facebook, and we'll try to get to everything before the end of the hour. With that, I'm going to give you briefly the election results before we're going to analyze those in a few minutes. But first, the results itself based on the information currently, and a lot of the information is still being disputed within Macedonia. It looks like it's heading to a recount as well. And it seems like there's been a lot of obstacles related to the State Election Commission, which we'll get to. So far, the SDSM political party, it seems, has 46 seats in parliament. Vamaro Adapamene has 44 seats in parliament. Dewey has 15 seats in parliament. Alianza of the Albanians and Alternativa have 12. Levica, which is coming into parliament for the very first time, has 2 mandates, and DAPA has 1. And so with that, I want to get into kind of the nitty-gritties of yesterday's election day. And also, I just want to preface by saying this is a lot of this is off the cuff. I want to also state that UMD as an organization is a non-governmental, non-partisan, non-profit organization based in Washington. A lot of the views that are going to be expressed here today do not necessarily reflect the views of the organization, but reflect the personal views of Stefani and myself in analyzing, and we wanted to give this opportunity to all of you to hear our analysis on what happened yesterday and what's to come. And so with that, I'd love to hear from Stefani, who lives in Macedonia, who is originally from Australia, a Macedonian citizen, and she voted for the very first time yesterday in Macedonia's elections. And so Stefani, tell us how your experience went, particularly with COVID-19 and all the strict measures that were being conducted on election day.
So I found yesterday really interesting, considering it's my first time ever voting in an election in Macedonia, and I just so happened to be living in Macedonia during these times. With the pandemic currently going on, I thought, well, at least where I live, my municipality, I thought that they handled it fairly well. Everyone had masks, so you were not allowed to enter the premises and vote without having your face protected. Upon arrival, there was a policeman there who just sat outside the building a few meters away, just to make sure that everything ran smoothly and that people were obeying social distancing restrictions and regulations. When you entered, they did have yellow lines every meter and a bit, just to make sure that you were standing apart from each other and that there wasn't a crowd forming. Before you entered into the voting room, there was actually a person who stood there and disinfected your hands, so they sprayed hand sanitizer on you. When you walked in, on your right hand side, there was someone who would check your thumbnail. So that's something I found really interesting, considering I have voted a couple of times already in Australia, and that's not something we have, where you go in and they check your thumbnail if it has a UV light on it, to see whether you voted whether you've previously voted. And then the next person would then check your national ID card to make sure that it's up to date, it hasn't been expired. And before going and voting, I actually did check online to make sure that I was registered to vote, considering that I have never voted before. And I had to change my address here and my passport and ID. So I did double check that, and when I got there and I was not in the first book that they opened, I said to myself, oh, what if now I'm not enrolled to vote and I can't vote? But then actually there was a second book that they had to check, and that second book was actually for the people living overseas, so those living abroad, which I found really interesting, that they had two books for the citizens that live in Macedonia and then the citizens that live within the diaspora. I went ahead and voted, put my paper into the ballot box, and left, and it felt good to vote, considering that it was my first time, and that I didn't have a negative experience, and with everything, the pandemic that's going on, I did feel safe. So yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you actually got the opportunity to express your right to vote in Macedonia, because many of us in the diaspora that are Macedonian citizens that registered to vote, apparently we didn't meet the quota for actual diaspora elections, or I guess elections at the various embassies and consulates abroad. And so seriously, the right to vote for Macedonian citizens was hampered, and many were disenfranchised, disappointed. And you know, it's interesting is you know, how you said this experience about you checking your you know, your name. And I looked myself up, and you know, not that I was going to travel to Macedonia under these circumstances with COVID-19, but if I did want to travel, I wanted to check if my name was on the registered roll, I guess, of the State Election Commission. And interestingly enough, I was not on any of the lists on the election voting list. And even though the State Election Commission did confirm me that I am registered back in March when the whole registration was happening, did you at all, you know, feel unsafe because of COVID-19? Stefani, and you know, how did people on the ground feel about having elections during COVID-19?
So where I live, it's fairly, I'd say, clean. There's not I don't think there are actually any who do have the virus. The people that were registered under Strumica happened to be in self-isolation, and I think they were fine. So here, I didn't feel, I'd say, scared or unsafe just because it's known that Strumica, you know, there hasn't been anyone infected, but again, you do have to be careful. I do take hand sanitizer with me everywhere. And, you know, when you are at the voting booth and you are holding that pen, you don't know who has held that pen before you. So, you know, you could obviously contract the virus that way. But in other cities, so for example, I'm actually I'm from Veles. My roots are from Veles. I just happened to be married here in Strumica, which is why I'm here. If my address was, you know, still my old address and I had to go and vote in Veles, it would be very, very different. So you probably wouldn't feel as safe just because Veles is one of the cities that do have higher cases of coronavirus. Meta, actually, I was wanting to ask you, with the voting registrations, are you able to elaborate a bit more, I guess, on the process with, you were actually on the ground in the diaspora helping people register to vote, and you do understand a lot more about the issues that had arisen with people registering, you know, them being registered and then that not being valid. So are you able to elaborate a bit more on this and perhaps on the relationship with Dick and, you know, complaints, and whether, do you think that this will improve in the future where the diaspora will have a guaranteed vote?
Yes, thank you, Stefani. And just to remind the audience, feel free to ask Stefani or I questions in the chat or on the Facebook comment section. First, I want to say that this is the first time since 2011. And so 2011, the electoral law was changed to allow Macedonian citizens abroad. And so I just want to make sure, like, diaspora is much broader terminology, and those that are citizens like you and I, Stefani, have the right to vote in Macedonia. And so, or for Macedonian elections, right? And so this is the first time since 2011, since we received that right to vote abroad, that right is no longer there. So these elections, we did not have a right to vote abroad, and so it's definitely a violation of our own human rights as citizens. And the government and the State Election Commission clearly were not interested in conducting any kind of elections abroad. And granted, I understand the COVID-19 concerns, but in the first place, it would have been nice that these elections not be held under such COVID-19 circumstances, because you just don't know, right? You don't know if the person in front of you has COVID or has any kind of symptoms of COVID, or the person in back of you. And so who knows how the cases are going to spike up over the next few weeks if more testing is done, and as a result of having these elections. So I get the concerns. However, there are mechanisms, with Macedonia being so high tech, the IT field is flourishing. The average salary amongst IT professionals in Macedonia is like 1,500, euros, versus the regular salary is 300 or 400 euros. So I'm sure that, a mechanism could have been developed where electronic voting could have happened, or postal voting, right? Absentee ballots, whatnot. The other thing is, so they gave the diaspora, so every time for an election, you have to re-register, which is in itself an inconvenience, because I'm sure you're aware, Stefani, in Australia, from an Australian perspective, and I'm aware from an American, where, once you move to a specific place, so let's say you change your house, your apartment or whatnot, you get a new driver's license, automatically you're more or less, you register to vote. And so the place you're the polling station will actually be the one that in your area, right? And so that voting registration doesn't change until the next time you move, right? Whereas in Macedonia, or for Macedonian elections, prior to every election, you have to vote. You have to register. And then in order to express your right to vote, you have to go to an actual embassy or a consulate. And so for places like Sydney, Australia, who several, of the audience participants are following from Sydney, they have no embassy or consulate. Probably, the closest one is a 3.5 hour drive. Our community in Los Angeles, for example, has to travel all the way to Chicago, which is like a 3-4 hour flight, in order to express, have their right to vote. And so with these previous registration, the State Election Commission gave the diaspora approximately 3.5 weeks or so. There was a lot of complications. I tried to register online. I couldn't do it. I actually had to physically bring my own paperwork to the embassy and have them help me register. And mind you, I read, speak, and write Macedonian fluently, so I don't have any issues, but I found it very difficult to register. And once I was able to then register, then I was able to give advice to others that were trying to register online. And what happened, we noticed that the numbers kept increasing, day after day. And then like 2 days before, and then the last day, they spiked up, where I believe that there was about 7,000 or so registrants. In order for the diaspora in order for Macedonia to hold elections abroad at the various embassies and consulates, they needed a minimum threshold of 6,500 registered voters. Well, we definitely met that requirement. The problem is the State Election Commission website kept falling throughout the whole process. And so who knows how many people were discouraged from that and didn't even want to bother. They said, okay, I'm going to try. And then they see the website doesn't work. And then they try again. It doesn't work. There were times where for about an hour, the website did not work back in March, right? And the audience should remember this, because we're going to get into this of what's going on today and yesterday in Macedonia. But the election website kept falling. And so people were, again, discouraged, disenfranchised, were wondering. There were questions. There were scores of questions to UMD. Obviously, UMD is a non-governmental, non-partisan organization, but if anybody has questions, we're happy to help them, right? And so then all of a sudden, the next day, you start seeing the numbers fall and the numbers of registrants. So they invalidated approximately 1,000 registrants.
Do you
And
think that,
go
sorry,
ahead.
I was just going to cut in. Do you think that that sort of discouragement is maybe perhaps done on purpose to reduce, the likelihood of people in the diaspora registering to vote, considering that, there were so many issues which so many people experienced?
Well, definitely. I mean, the arguments in Macedonia saying that the diaspora elections are very expensive, approximately, 1.3 million, 1.5 million. The last ones, they were estimating 500,000 euros. So it just depends on, it depends on the arguments, right, in Macedonia in terms of how much it costs. But what I will say is I don't buy the whole arguments regarding how expensive it is, because if you really want to decrease the cost, you could definitely implement electronic voting. You could implement absentee ballots, postal, voting. And so there are ways to decrease the costs of having elections abroad. But for sure, I definitely think that with the country not having a lot of resources, as you know, and the members of the audience know, the diaspora remittances account for 18 to 20% of Macedonia's GDP. And so there's now with COVID, you've seen a decrease of remittances, you've seen a decrease of investments, and you've seen a decrease in tourism, right? Macedonians are not traveling, or citizens of Macedonia are not traveling to Macedonia, right? And so definitely I understand the cost, but that doesn't mean that you have to hinder the right to vote of Macedonian citizens. And you can definitely do mechanisms. Now, with that, definitely the State Election Commission is in violation of several rules here. And also they are in violation of the right to privacy, the individual's privacy, because what happened is everybody that registered to vote, which is different from people back in Macedonia. So for example, like yourself, your address is not listed publicly, whereas my address and everybody that registered abroad is public information on the State Election Commission website. And so that is an infringement of our privacy rights. And we wrote to the State Election Commission and they did not respond whatsoever. We've been waiting. And we are now contemplating next steps, because definitely the State Election Commission has violated the rights of Macedonian citizens abroad throughout this whole process. And so, that's a whole another matter. I'm sure we could get into it, but please, Stefani, I don't know if you have any more comments or questions regarding this area specifically.
No, I was actually wanting to ask now, while we're on the topic of the commission, I'm sure that you obviously noticed that it was hacked. Yesterday, I actually tried opening their website to see if there were any updated results today, and I couldn't access it. So I was wondering on what your thoughts were with this.
Well, it goes back to this point of, again, Macedonia being sort of like a Silicon Valley of Southeast Europe, and everybody, saying that Veles is the fake news capital of the world, right? We've heard those arguments. We've heard a lot of, issues regarding this. I don't know how it happens that the State Election Commission website is hacked on the day of the deadline for voter registration of the diaspora. And it's also surprisingly hacked on the day of elections. and it's still hacked. So how is it that they have not been able to fix this issue since yesterday? Where are the IT professionals that are helping these institutions, the data security and all that? Now, that then gets into the breach of data security information, right? And I'm not a lawyer and I can't get into that, but definitely it raises a lot of questions. And I mean, those of us that were following the elections very closely yesterday saw that, right? And we were at a loss for how to get the information. Where do you find the information? You see it, certain political parties are coming out with their own results. The State Election Commission has a YouTube video that they're live streaming where somebody half the time was in front of the screen, so you couldn't even see most of the results happening. The media are reporting their own analysis and simulations of the election. So it became very difficult, and the only TV that I saw, and there's several questions in the chat that maybe we could get to because they relate to this specific topic. The media outlets, for example, 24 News, 24 Vesti, were on for about 5 hours with debate discussions. One thing that and I'm sure, Stefani, I think you pointed out yesterday is that there was only one woman on one of the panels. Everything was heavy men panels in analysis of the election results. But the other thing is it was the only opportunity to watch the actual kind of the excitement behind what's going on in Macedonia, whether you support one side, another side, a third side, or whatever. But I didn't notice any other TVs kind of live coverage the way 24 News was doing it. But granted, I watched it on Facebook. Others probably have cable TV or satellite TV or people back home, right, in Macedonia. I know there's another question here is, what can we in the diaspora do, if anything, to ensure that the process for diaspora voting in Macedonian elections is made simpler for future elections? It really depends on the people in Macedonia. It's the State Election Commission, it's the government. If they believe that Macedonian citizens deserve the right to vote abroad, and actually it's not about a belief, it's the law. It's a matter of how you interpret the law and how you implement the law. And the implementation of the law did not happen this time around, where we were not offered the right or the opportunity to vote at the embassies and consulates. Definitely more information. I definitely think that what I noticed this last time is the consulates and the embassies, the consulates did not do any outreach regarding or email communications regularly. And me being based in DC, I get an email from the Macedonian embassy regularly when certain news happens, whether it's an event or whatever. Every time in prior elections, I've gotten an email, even though I just became a citizen 2 years ago. Even before that, I would get emails saying that the registration for diaspora is happening. What we noticed is the Minister of Diaspora did not promote this. The Agency of Diaspora, I think, had one posting. The Foreign Ministry had one posting at the get-go. And unless you're somebody like you and I probably, Stefani, that follow every day what's going on all over in the media and everything. And so we'll be able to dig up that information and we'll be aware of it. But it doesn't seem that the average person would not be, right? And so unless somebody sends an email or information, so I think the lack of information was definitely an impediment. And there's another one. One of the questions is, to be fair, was this regulation around when the previous party regarding the discouragement of diaspora votes? Definitely the obstacles that we're facing now are somewhat similar to what was going on before, I believe. And particularly when it comes to the access to polling stations, definitely existed. I think in previous elections, sometimes they gave 2 weeks notice in advance. So definitely, there has been a change. The fact that we had 3.5 weeks perhaps is a little bit more, but around the same time, COVID-19 hit. And so, for example, Italy, where there's an estimated, over 100,000 citizens of Macedonia residing, they were hit very hard and the entire country was under lockdown. So I doubt many of them, even if they tried to register to vote electronically, they couldn't express their right, So, Stefani, please.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Meto. In regards to the Ministry for Diaspora, I think that I was, obviously for those who don't know, I was a Birthright Macedonian participant last year, and I actually interned with the Ministry for Diaspora, who's actually without portfolio. So after, once these election results have been finalized and we have a new government, correct me if I'm wrong, Metal, but I think that means perhaps that ministry might not exist anymore. I think that considering the large, diaspora that we do have, having a Ministry of Diaspora or even relating somehow, joining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with extending it to include some sort of diaspora relationship there, I think is really important. I was wondering what your thoughts were on this, and do you think that this is possible?
Well, something that so UMD as an organization has always encouraged the need for greater diaspora engagement. More than, definitely more people live out of the country than within Macedonia. And we are an unbelievable resource to Macedonia, right? And there was a Macedonian ministry for diaspora that was abolished. And apparently the reason it was abolished is that the European Union had said, you have too many ministries and you're spending too much money, resources on all these ministries. I'm of the belief that definitely, yes, there are too many ministries in Macedonia. I think there's about 27 ministries in Macedonia. A country like Switzerland has about 14, 15, and they have probably approximately the same size in population, almost, land mass, all that. And so, if you could do it in 14 ministries, you don't need 27, right? However, definitely there is a need for diaspora a minister. It's unfortunate that it is without portfolio, meaning like it's not a full-on ministry with resources and all that. It's commendable that there is even somebody responsible for the diaspora, but I think you and I and others can notice that the engagement between the current government towards the diaspora has been very minimal. There have been engagements at the beginning, and obviously there was a strategy for how to work with the diaspora, and UMD gave a lot of recommendations on how to improve relations between Macedonian governments, regardless of who's in power, because the diaspora should not be politicized. The diaspora is an unbelievable resource, both in the countries we live in locally, as well as economically, and in all other industries, the arts, the culture, sports, whatnot. And so, having said that, if the next government, the encouragement would be, it would be nice to see more diaspora people, or at least people that have greater experience abroad, that have experience in bigger corporate world, nonprofit world, the legal world, whatnot, that will then take up roles in Macedonia within a future government. I think it would be fair to say say that at least 10 to 15% of government ministries should probably be diaspora. I'm throwing that out there as an idea. But another thing is there are examples like Israel, for example, that has, a Ministry of Foreign Affairs and diaspora, right? And so, or national diaspora. And so you could evaluate combining both, but the current structure of having a Minister of Diaspora plus a agency for emigration, plus a coordination team among 7 ministries that hardly does much, and then another sector in the foreign ministry. So you're spending probably the same amount of resources that you would spend in having a Ministry of Diaspora.
Yes, it sounds like too much administration and not enough work going on.
Well, the government in Macedonia is probably the largest employer, and I believe that the next government, whoever that may be, really seriously needs to tackle this issue, because the more big government hampers on big business and small business, small and medium-sized enterprises, and also then it's more prone to corruption, right? And violations in law, rule of law, and whatnot. Stephanie, I think there's a couple of more questions amongst the audience. If you want to mention those.
Yeah. So can it be fairly considered that the impediments to diaspora voting are politically driven and potentially improper?
Definitely, and parties in Macedonia believe that the diaspora votes a certain way, and granted, diaspora, yes, traditionally is more conservative leaning in terms of their homelands. However, that does not mean the diaspora is not politically sound on deciding who, and when I say diaspora, I mean broader and Macedonian citizens abroad are not stupid. I believe they can read, they can analyze, they can develop their own opinions on who they want to support. There should not be a question in Macedonia of one party being better for the diaspora. It should be all parties should see the diaspora as a tool to improve the homeland. You are living there right now and spending your funds in Macedonia. I have probably 24 friends that have moved over the last 5 years to Macedonia, and they are working there, living there, raising their families, and they are an unbelievable resource. And several of them opened up outsourcing shops for clients abroad, right? And so they're creating jobs in Macedonia. We need to stop looking at the diaspora from the eye of our political parties, but look at the diaspora from the eye of the homeland, and how we all can work together. We're a partner, and somebody needs to be the bridge. And unfortunately, we're not seeing, the interlocutor there, somebody that's really going out and saying, we're going to get the diaspora more involved.
As someone who has had that experience of being born and raised overseas and then coming here and living here, I have sensed that sort of division, I would say, where you're being told. But I've had I've heard comments saying how, the diaspora shouldn't have the right to vote. They should come back and live here, live off that paycheck, that they live here and experience the daily struggles that, Macedonians at home here experience. And I think there's sort of, how would I phrase this, a bit of a miscommunication or misunderstanding in regards to our diaspora relations. And I believe that it's something as Macedonians as a whole and as a whole community should address and focus on not dividing ourselves as, who lives in the diaspora or who lives at home, but more of how we can help each other and leave a better impact and do things for the better.
Definitely, Stephanie. I couldn't agree more, and I hope that whoever builds the next government will see the diaspora. And I think that, you know, if we kind of go back a few steps, another thing of why a lot of diaspora are, you know, and you can feel the sentiment, not just, you know, in Macedonia, because you definitely can feel the sentiment in Macedonia, but you can definitely feel it abroad. Our Macedonian diaspora that have fought for a free, independent, sovereign country called Macedonia were very discouraged, disappointed, emotionally hurt and upset over the fact that Macedonia changed its name. And we fought so hard to get 140 countries to recognize Macedonia. And so now, having a homeland that's called something that we're not comfortable with, the fact that they didn't ask us on our thoughts, they didn't really ask for assistance on, you know, the global effort to keep our right to self-determination and fight back. You know, you and I are friends and should be able to sit on the same table and recognize each other as Stefani and Meto. Nobody should block somebody because of their name or some domestic squabbling, domestic political issue. And unfortunately, the international community, we saw that, allowed Greece to do this, and more or less they're allowing now Bulgaria to continue that. And we'll get into that in a couple of minutes. But you know, you saw the referendum, you saw that there wasn't a 50% turnout. The turnout was 36%. So you had close to 1 million people that were either boycotted or voted against the name change. And the way the question was phrased is, are you for NATO and EU membership, agreeing to the name change? What if you're pro-NATO, anti-EU? What if you're pro-EU, anti-NATO? What if you're both but don't want to change the name? You know, all that stuff. So like there's the question was improperly phrased. The referendum did not meet the quota. The government went forward regardless. And I'm sure that long term, more and more information is going to be coming out to why, things happen the way they happened. And you and I can, and members of the audience can debate this long term. Why don't we maybe tackle some more kind of like the actual results, and just to answer just really quickly here on the turnout. And so looking at one, Macedonia hasn't had a census since 2002, right? And the last time the census was held, they had about 2.1 million people registered. And at the time, people were alleging that those were not the real numbers. So now, having the World Bank come out with numbers or projections, Eurostats, different political parties claiming that the other political party is the cause of why so many youth have left the country and how so many people have left the country looking for better opportunities. Because I remember, in the 90s, over 60%, maybe over 70% were under the age of 30, whereas now probably that number is not the case, right? And you have a growingly elderly population, and a lot of youth are leaving the country, creating a huge brain drain on the economy and for the future development of the country, right? And having said that, the State Election Commission for the last 10 years, so it doesn't matter who's controlling, what political parties are, in working together in, because every political party appoints members to the State Election Commission. Regardless, they've been saying that there's 1.8 million registered voters. So is that registered voters on the day of in country? Does that consist of people abroad? You know, the predictions say that in the last 15 years, or the estimates of World Bank, Eurostats, and many political parties, if you combine it all, anywhere between 650,000 and 850,000 have left the country. I remember we had a discussion at the UMD office in Washington where we had the executive director of the American Chamber of Commerce in Macedonia speak, and she said how they estimate probably, and this is obviously her perspective, I don't think it necessarily speaks on behalf of the chamber, but 1.3 to 1.5 million people are left in the country. And so if you actually, there's a major problem at the get-go is you don't actually know how many people reside in your country, how many people have left, and who's taking advantage of the services, healthcare, education, all that stuff. You have some estimates based on health cards, because obviously Macedonia has a public health system, and everybody that has or is taking advantage of the public health system has a identity card. And even those numbers, they say, are probably 1.4, 1.5 million. And so the voter turnout could potentially, I mean, if you have less on the day of election day, then maybe the voter turnout is way more. Nobody knows. And right now, based on the current, numbers, they're saying about 50.8, 51.3% voter turnout, which is still very low in terms of the legitimacy of any government. I mean, we have that in the United States as well, or other countries face similar problems.
Yes, definitely, I agree. With the registered votes, it was definitely noticeable this year that there was a low turnout. And I think there's sort of a sense of there's voter apathy. So considering with everything that was going on, perhaps I think that there were some people who didn't turn up to vote yesterday because they might have been scared. They might be a mother who has kids at home, or a father who doesn't want to risk the health of their children, or they might have been an elderly person. But then there's also, I believe, a sense of apathy in regards to the people here are sort of tired. They haven't seen much of a change, much of a big difference within the last couple of years. I mean, just go and ask your average agricultural farmer, has he been paid off from selling his produce last year? There's a huge percentage of the population here that has not been, who are farmers. So they're still in a minus in regards to their income and the pays that they need to be getting, and as well with funds from the government that was provided for farmers. There's a lot of people who haven't received those funds that were promised to them by the government. So I think all of these points that I just mentioned contributed in some way or another to yesterday's low turnout.
I believe Stefani having some issues, couldn't hear that last part.
I was just mentioning how all the points that I mentioned, I believe, contributed in some way or another towards the low turnout yesterday. So that's why I believe that there was lower a percentage of voters.
Definitely. I mean, I personally would not want to put my family at risk, and I think that it's still very premature. I mean, we argued these reasons before the international community. We sent regular communications to all the political parties and our press releases, as well as communications to the various embassies that are based in Macedonia, that this is not the time to hold these elections. The time right now is to make sure that people are safe and healthy. And when you see the numbers increasing every day and you see more and more deaths, I mean, I think Macedonia is the second in the region in terms of deaths. I might be wrong. I don't have the, I'm not looking at the latest numbers as of today, but definitely, the focus needs to be on the safety and the health. And I believe if there's a will, there's a way, and they could have potentially kind of postpone these until better times. Now, I think we should probably go into analysis of the election results and what's expected, because I know several members of our audience are not Macedonian and may not be as familiar with obviously the diaspora, and the role and all that is obviously a major concern to us as Macedonian citizens. But many people are wondering the question of what happens next. And so, and I'm sure, Stefani, you have your views in analyzing the fact that, let's say, well, now there's information that 80,000 votes were misappropriately attributed. So that's one news media that came out today. There's another one that a state election commission vehicle carrying ballots from Gostivar was burned. And so because of the hacking, or the alleged hacking of the State Election Commission website, now they actually have to physically count all the ballots in addition to the electronic voting, and they have to double check and reconfirm. And so who knows? I don't know the latest information on what happened with the vehicle. The fact that it's coming from a place called Gostivar, which is not controlled by DUI, which is the third, I guess, largest party in Macedonia. It's controlled by the Alliance of the Albanians, and their local mayor is from that party, Arben Taravari. And I actually had the pleasure of debating with him on issues of minority rights in Macedonia on Samovistina on Kanal Pit a couple of years ago. But it's I'm not a guy of belief in conspiracy theories and all that. I like factual information. I want to get my information from as many sources as possible before I form a judgment. But it's interesting that this is all happening since yesterday. And so SDSM has 46, Vamaro has 44. They need 61 in order to form a government. And so most likely the mandate will be given to the Social Democrats, it seems, because they have, granted, the results can change today. They have the ODIHR, which is the election monitoring mission of the OSCE, has not come out with their statement and their findings. As you know, there's typically an election monitoring mission in Macedonia or anywhere in Europe that are members of the OSCE. And so we don't know what's going to happen. So this is based on the current numbers, is, 46 plus DUI 15 can easily form a minority government of 61 if they fail. And I think we all know DUI threw a ball out of left curve, kind of, the baseball terminology, when they said, we're going to build a coalition with any political party that allows us to have an Albanian prime minister. And so this comes to and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Stefani, is the power of ethnic politics in Macedonia, and the fact that, ethnicities are, using their own ethnic cards, and to build coalitions. Any decision that they make, they look from an ethnic perspective, not in a national perspective. And so what are your thoughts on the ground on this?
Well, at the moment, as we can tell, the ball is in the court of the Albanian party, so they have the upper hand. And I guess to an extent, what could perhaps be the last say in who is going to form the new government. But I think that in regards to the ethnic parties, I would like to see, Meto, you could probably expand upon this, in regards to why and how this all came about, why there are ethnic parties in Macedonia that some people from the audience might not understand. But I think that when there are parties, the parties need to be, so bringing in, their agenda has to be for the country which they are in. So it needs to be for all people. So we do know that some Albanians here in Macedonia do vote for Ovamaro or Sadasama, but that's probably because their agenda, perhaps at the time, was what what the Albanians might have favoured, or it depends on the agenda, I guess, or the party platform. So I'm not too sure as to how this could all go ahead, or perhaps be resolved or changed here in Macedonia, since this hasn't been in place for so many years, and it's, I guess, an everyday thing here, an everyday election, part of the elections here. But yeah, I was hoping that you could expand more upon perhaps the Tirana platform and going into why and how all of this came about.
Sure. I analyzed the Tirana platform quite a bit, and so for the members of the audience, this was a platform that was drafted in Tirana by the Prime Minister Edi Rama. He brought the leaders of the four main political parties in Macedonia to Tirana. I think it was like October 2016. And then they came out with this Tirana platform on Christmas Day on January 7, 2017. And what I found astonishing about this is that their first top points in this platform were we must change the anthem, the flag, now kind of like, we have to implement Albanian language as a second official language. So their top priorities were ethnic. Their second, third priorities were education, economic, and health, right? And for me, if I were, I guess, somebody that is of Albanian heritage in Macedonia, I'd vote for a party that's going to help my sustainability as a person and my family, to make sure that they're comfortable and their livelihood is secure, and my children do not want to move out of the country. That's
So
number
your
one.
needs.
What's that?
That's what I was trying to mention before, how we have, sometimes ethnic Albanians do vote for Vamarosa Lisma because their party platform favors their needs and what they are looking for.
Yes, and for the first time, we saw this pre-election coalition between SDSM and BESA. And BESA was a party that came out of nowhere amongst the Albanian community in Macedonia. And interestingly, I think at the time there was allegations that Turkey's President Erdogan and his political party were responsible in funding in operating this political party. I cannot guarantee the accuracy of that. However, there was a pre-election coalition that occurred between SDSM and BESA. And so, interestingly enough, the same debate is going on in Albania currently, and I've been following that debate because there is a Macedonian minority in Albania, and they do have representation in parliament, and they are having the debate of whether to allow pre-election coalitions to happen. And they're arguing that they should not happen because it then creates greater problems in terms of why this country is a parliamentary. If it's a parliamentary system, then all political parties need to vie for office, and all political parties then choose to build a coalition with one or the other or more, and all that. And obviously, people of the opposition are upset about that, and I'm not going to get into those details even more, but you can definitely notice the difference in terms of the pre-election coalition, and also the post-election coalition building. So it's going to be interesting and dynamic to see what's going to happen. The fact that the voting is so close, somewhat similar to 2016, although SDSM and Vamero had more mandates in parliament at the time. This could create a crisis for the country, and this could create a crisis where they don't, if Dewey is a stickler that it must be an Albanian person, and I'm of the mind that if you're qualified, it shouldn't matter what ethnic group you are, because there are so many fascinating people in all minorities in Macedonia, Roma, Turkish, Bosnian, that are also just as qualified. And I was watching a debate last week, I think, and there was a debate between all the top three political parties, and they were saying it must be an Albanian. Well, it's interesting, why weren't they backing the candidate that was Albanian in the presidential elections if they really wanted a top? And so it just changes the dynamic. It adds an ethnic dimension. It adds a sort of 19th century mindset. And I thought we're all trying to build a society for all that's equal for all. And so, and you can debate about the fact that there's 6 electoral districts as opposed to 1. There are minority parties like Levica, for example, and I'm not, I don't want to sort of say that I'm encouraging support or that I believe in what they're advocating, but there are parties like Levica, for example, that had probably more than 30,000 votes, but they only got 2. And by the way, in Macedonia, you need, I believe, 6,400 votes in order to have 1 MP. But because they got it throughout the whole country, in 6 districts, it was divided, and so they couldn't get more than 2, I guess. But if it was 1 electoral district, 1 society for all, then minority parties like Integra or Levica or Glas za Macedonia or DAPA might have more votes, more mandates.
Yeah, I think so too. Sorry, just give me a moment to look through my notes. Method, did you have anything else you wanted to mention? Or did you want to go over some of the questions in the chat that have been sent?
Yeah, I believe a lot of these questions we've sort of answered perhaps, but please, Stefani, I think a couple of them I think are definitely valid, and we can, we've answered a portion of it, but we definitely can elaborate a little bit more. And we're running a little bit over time, but I definitely think it's a great conversation. I think a lot of you want to continue hearing, more about the information coming out of Macedonia right now.
Perhaps if I posed a question to you then, what are some of the changes that perhaps you would like to see come with this new government?
Well, whatever government comes to power, I definitely think that one, crime and corruption, rule of law are number one, without a doubt, because nobody is going to invest in your country if there's no rule of law. If people believe that politicians are easily susceptible to bribes, I I'm sure you've had experiences. I've had experiences of why didn't you? If you brought a gift to that person, you probably would have finished. You would have gotten the job done a lot sooner instead of waiting the regular route. And when we're so accustomed to following order abroad, and so when we see that, it's not common to us. And so that's number one. Definitely the public administration decreasing the size, but that also means funneling more funds into developing the small and medium-sized enterprises. The whole notion that some big company corporation is going to come in and build 1,000 jobs is not something that's happening right now, and I don't predict that many coming in unless really Macedonia has the best benefits to offer, but definitely labor rights need to be improved for people. I mean, there's a major inconsistency of average salary, minimum wage, and those in different industries like the IT or the banking or whatever industries, right? The agricultural industry, you mentioned that before. I have family members that they farm so much produce, and probably half of that produce is thrown out because nobody's buying it. And so this government or whoever comes into power needs to focus on competitive advantage, right? And selling Macedonia of why people need to invest in the country, why people need to buy the produce throughout the country and also throughout the region. And Macedonia already has free trade agreements with many countries. This mini Schengen idea that was this idea of, free movement of people and goods that was created between Albania, Serbia, and Macedonia's prime ministers or president, to have a creative way because of what France did or Macron did in blocking Macedonia and Albania's EU progress. So here we are, we're going to come out with this creative way. And it's like, when Johannes Hahn, the previous actually, Stefan Fule, came up with this creative way of high-level accession dialogue because the Gruevski government did not secure a date for accession talks with the EU. And so now we're going to create this new dialogue process. There are existing mechanisms in place already. You do not need to recreate the wheel. All you need to do is perfect the mechanisms at hand. And so definitely economic development is number one, probably because that's going to decrease the brain drain rates. And also, I think that you need to develop this is probably comes through the Ministry of Diaspora, combined with, making sure that the country has this rule of law, where maybe diaspora people like yourself or myself or others that would like to move to Macedonia and would like to help out as much as possible. And now with COVID-19, it's fascinating. 2 days ago, an intern of mine messaged me and said, Meto, I found an IT job, not in Macedonia, here in the United States. And he said, I'm going to go to Macedonia for 4 to 6 months and I'm going to live there because it's cheaper. It's a better system perhaps in, nature, all that, because I mean, granted, in certain places in the United States, you have plenty of nature, but in Washington, when everything surrounding me is, buildings and concrete, you'd rather probably be in the mountains in Macedonia working from your computer, right? And so it's great that I'm hearing that, and I think there's so much more potential. And probably the last thing that I'd like to mention is this media. The media freedom. Macedonia is 92nd, according to the Reporters Without Borders report that came out yesterday for journalists. Yes, it received 3 points more than the previous year, but that's not enough to say that there's real change amongst the media. The media drives discourse within Macedonian society. And if the media is not operating freely without pressure from different political parties, because you can definitely from a mile away, 10-foot floor, you can see which media are advocating which perspectives amongst Macedonian society. So we need more independent media, and independent media that's not going to be afraid of raising concerns amongst political leaders and society.
Yep, I completely agree. Just tying in back with your comment on the media, something I did mention during these campaigns was you can pick out what media outlet favored which party, and there was also a lot of seeing that negative sort of connotation in the media tied to these political parties. And it was basically primarily just the two major political parties who did get a lot of the media coverage. Even when you're just driving through different cities here, you'll see billboards. Basically from Vamarosa, the summer, very, very, how do I phrase this? It wasn't so often that you would see the commercials from the minor political parties on TV. Yes, obviously they did show them, but they didn't get a lot of the prime time, and I don't believe that they either got billboards or anything similar like that.
Well, Stefani, having, you asked me of what I'd like to see. I'd like to turn that question over to you. And what would you like to see improve in Macedonia, particularly during your stay there? I mean, you've been there for a little bit over a year. And so tell me a little bit more about what you would like to see. Particularly, and I should have said this earlier, Stefani is part of our Young Leaders program called Generation M, which are, where UMD is investing in the future of our leaders, our future leaders of our communities. And somebody as a young leader, what would you like to see changed in Macedonia?
Yep. So just going off from my own experiences, something that I would actually like to see is more jobs in the other cities, so not having everything based in Skopje. So if I was, I have found it difficult to find a job here just because everything is in Skopje, and it was hard enough picking up and moving here, and then moving to a whole different city all over again for a job can be difficult as well. So you have a lot of youth and people that I know, friends studying. Everything is basically based in the capital city. All the other jobs here, they're mainly factories and your everyday sort of work, which doesn't really give much of an opportunity to the youth here. So that's also something that's contributing to that brain drain. Something else that I would actually like to see changed here is improvements to the healthcare system. I guess perhaps maybe more funding or adequate, when there is funding being given, that funding is being used for what it needs to be used. So it's not just your hospitals in Skopje that need to be renovated or be improved. It's also, you will get sick people in Veles or Strumica, Bitola, wherever that may be. So those hospitals also need to have a little bit more help. I'd also like to see a bit of a change in the mentality. So that's obviously something that's not very easy to change. It might be might come with time with the younger generation. But I guess in terms of equal gender equality, gender opportunities, so having more women in leadership positions in Macedonia would be really good. You will see a lot of images, about ministers or whoever it may be, people in positions at a meeting, and you will look at that photo and you might see a couple of women there, but the women are not sitting at the table. They are sitting on the sidelines as observers or assistants. Also, women in Macedonia, I forgot the exact percentage. I think it was probably around 13 to 14% that they are paid lesser compared to a male's average wage. A woman is also less likely to get that promotion or that CEO position in a big firm or a big company. So I think these are, as a country who is aspiring to be more democratic and more progressive and leading in certain areas, this is something that obviously needs to be addressed if we want to keep up with the modern world.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Stefani. It's good to hear that perspective. And I'm so glad that you brought up the seat at the table for women, because we just did that event, a couple of weeks ago with the author Susan Sloan of A Seat at the Table, Women, Diplomacy and Lessons for the World. And definitely there needs to be more women, particularly, I mean, you heard, obviously there's a constitutional rule that 30% or so need to be women. And then, certain candidates were saying we should do 40%. My thing is, why not 50? I mean, if they're qualified, there should be in position. And look, the national bank governor in Macedonia is a woman, and she's been doing, it seems like, an impeccable job. And many institutions in the world are run by women, and there's no reason why that should not be the case in Macedonia. And we want to encourage that. And I think this is a prime example, amongst Generation M, probably 70% of the people involved are women, particularly, amongst the young leaders, our chairs. We just elected 3 new women on the UMD board that will be announced very soon. And so we have to we have to be the change that we want to see, right? And so this is, we have to preach what we preach, we have to do, right? And so, and hopefully Macedonia will see this. And just to tie on a little bit, and there's a couple of questions I see in the audience. One is, how do we, what needs to be done to break down this mentality of us versus them, particularly in the example of Australia. Australians do not view the Aussies abroad as us versus them. And actually, like what I've noticed in the United States, you have a very vibrant Australian diaspora community with organizations in the United States that are helping improve and drive the agenda between Australia and the United States, right? So, have you faced any of those, the us versus them, and how can we break down that mentality?
Yes, living here, I think I have faced that probably more than I would back home. It'll just be, it's just everyday sort of stuff. How is it that, you from the diaspora have come back and decided to live here? Why are you here? Isn't it better over there? Why don't you pack up your stuff and move here permanently? So I have faced those sort of comments or criticisms. Sometimes that can be a joke, but to every joke, there's a little bit of truth, as they say. I guess a way that we could bridge that sort of gap and fix that would probably be to address that misunderstanding. So I'm one who likes open discussions. So I think that there definitely needs to be some sort of open discussion between Macedonians at home and Macedonians abroad, and even just between everyday people, which would help bridge that gap. Like we mentioned before, having that permanent ministry for diaspora, or someone who is responsible for diaspora, to not just be in that position, but to actually implement the ideas that they come up with. So yes, there is this national strategy on how to cooperate with the diaspora, but that strategy isn't there, you know, just for show or just to sit on the shelf. It does need to be implemented. And it would definitely help in bridging that gap between us and them, and, you know, realizing that we are divided enough as it is, and this needs to stop. It's actually been going on for quite some time, as our audience probably knows or agrees with. But I think it is possible, and I believe that perhaps maybe more likely, more possible today with, you know, the great youths, not just at home, but within the diaspora as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. And I think we'll probably wind it down. There's just a couple of more points. One, it's good to see some familiar faces, and one of them here is Matthias Vasquez with the Association of French community or the French Macedonian collaboration, and France has definitely a growing relationship with Macedonia. One of UMD's first outside of the United States, Canada, and Australia representatives was in Paris, and we have always been strong promoters of French-Macedonian alliance, and particularly in the arts and culture and film. And so I'm pleased that he's part of the conversation here and listening. And that ties us into, I think the final kind of point question on this is from a community leader out of Toronto, who's probably been the best promoter for Macedonian film abroad, and that's Virginia Evans with the Macedonian Film Festival. And she brought up a very good question, and I think it leaves sort of on a positive note, is how is this election results going to affect the cultural Macedonian exports such as film, which have become very vibrant, or is it business as usual? And definitely understanding where this question is coming from, because Virginia and the Macedonian Film Festival are the only film festival abroad promoting Macedonia's century-old plus filmmaking history. And Macedonia has produced so many amazing films over the last 30 years. And so definitely, hopefully no issues are affected of the film industry in Macedonia. A few things that we've noticed is obviously when films are done, then the film agency or others sometimes do not pay the employees of the films, or the directors and the producers don't pay the people working on those films in a timely fashion, or some wait many years. And so Macedonia's government, whoever that may be, should definitely invest more in the filmmaking culture, particularly in how could I put it? Promoting Macedonia's filmmaking culture and possibilities and opportunities to non-Macedonians, so that they can come to Macedonia and shoot their films. You know, there was that whole fake news situation where I think we all bought it that Game of Thrones was going to come into Macedonia and film, and that wasn't the case. And we all promoted it because we were all so excited, but nobody came in and filmed their series in Macedonia. And so hopefully the film industry will not be affected, and hopefully Virginia and the team at the Macedonian Film Festival will have plenty of films that they can screen this year virtually, unfortunately, and then in future years in physical theater spaces. Stephanie, any final thoughts before we conclude?
I just wanted to say to everyone, thank you all for joining us today and participating in our call, and hopefully we'll get to all meet in person one day.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Stefani, for all that you do in Generation M and the entire team. And thank you very much for speaking so openly and frankly about the situation in Macedonia, and to all of our audience paying attention on Zoom and participating on Facebook. Apologize if we didn't get to some of the questions. There's quite a bit, and I think we need to have a specific only Diaspora Macedonia relations discussion, and maybe bring on some folks that have experience investing in Macedonia and others. But let's see what's going to happen over the next couple of days. We might have to come back and have another conversation on analyzing the election results, but we'll see what comes out of the State Election Commission, the OSCE, and then monitor the coalition building. But at the end, I just want to give a positive note to everybody. Yes, your specific party may not have won, or you are disenfranchised or upset about the name issue and everything. But at the end of the day, we are Macedonians, and nobody's going to prevent us from expressing our Macedonian hoodness anywhere in the world. And we're going to continue educating the public and those that are non-Macedonians of why we deserve the right to self-determination. And I definitely am optimistic for the future, particularly because of young leaders like Stefani and others, and the Friends of Macedonia community abroad that are helping Macedonia. And so thank you all, and have a wonderful day and evening in Macedonia. And sorry for the Australians, it's the wee hours of, I guess, past midnight by you guys, but thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.